Hello, we're going to get started on focusing on the book of Judges, which is a cool book, and it's really focused on kind of a cycle of what happens to God's people. And we've already heard the first part. They sin, okay? What happens? What does God do when his people sin? Well, that's what's going to be brought up in Judges. So the same cycle goes over and over again. I'll bring it up a lot, but there's 4 steps. First, the Israelites sin by turning to other gods. A lot of times they're called the Baals, which is Baal. It's just the name of a type of god, a fertility god. You know how I talked about the golden calf? This idea you wanted more calves, you wanted more babies, you wanted more baby animals, you wanted more baby ewes, you wanted more more grain for the field, right? All this was dealing with fertility, and so the Baals were these fertility gods. So the Israelites would run away from God to these idols, okay? And then, so that was step 1. Step 2 was God would punish them in some way. So that was step 2. Step 3 was that the Israelites would cry out to God, that they said they were sorry, they repent, they turned back to God. And step 4 is God would raise up a judge, which was like a leader. It would raise up a judge to save the Israelites. And then the cycle would start all over again. And that's what we're going to learn about today. So Judges chapter 2 is where we're going to start. And we're going to start at verse 11. Oh, well, I'll start at verse 10. So Judges 2, verse 10. After that whole generation had been gathered to their fathers, another generation grew up who knew neither the Lord nor what he had done for Israel. Then the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord and served the Baals. They forsook the Lord, the God of their fathers, who had brought them up out of Egypt. They followed and worshipped various gods of the peoples around them. They provoked the Lord to anger because they forsook him and served Baal and the Ashtoreths. In his anger against Israel, the Lord handed them over to raiders who plundered them. He sold them to their enemies all around, whom they were no longer able to resist. Whenever Israel went out to fight, the hand of the Lord was against them to defeat them, just as he had sworn to them. They were in great distress. Then the Lord raised up judges who saved them out of the hands of these raiders. So I'm just going to go back through what I just read, make sure we understand the cycle. First of all, that verse 10, I wasn't going to start there, but the point is, no, the Israelites kind of forgot about God. And why does that matter? Well, I kind of think that matters nowadays too. What happens if you don't go to church ever, right? You just you forget about God. That's a problem, and more people are getting to that point. And so what happens is it's not like God, just because you don't go to church, it doesn't exist, And by the way, I know a lot of people have to just watch church right now. I get that. I'm just saying if you just don't pay any attention to God, it doesn't mean he stops existing. It just means you stop sort of paying attention and you start falling into these traps that he's commanded us not to do or warned us about, right? And so bad things can happen. So in verse 11, it says the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord. That's step 1, right? They run to these other gods, these Baals. It says Ashtoreth. That's just another god here. And then the next thing, what happens? The second step, God punishes them. And what it says here in verse 14, in his anger against Israel, the Lord handed them over to raiders who plundered them. Okay? So that's step 2. What's step 3? They cry out to God. Now, sometimes in following chapters, they'll focus on this a lot more. All they really say here is in verse 15, it says they were in great distress. Okay, that's step 3, kind of short in this part of the story. Verse 4, what's the fourth thing? God raises up a judge to lead them. It says, verse 16, then the Lord raised up judges who saved them out of the hands of these raiders. Again, a judge was considered just a leader. See, they didn't have a king. They didn't have someone like that. They didn't have a president. They had a judge. They had somebody who would sort of decide right and wrong and lead the Israelites. And so God brought them up from the Israelites, someone to lead them. So we're going to find out some of these judges, and these are some great stories. These are some of my favorite stories. We're going to start at Judges chapter 3, verse 12, and we're going to learn about Ehud. Ehud, I usually call him. Once again, the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord. Step 1, right? And because they did this evil, the Lord gave Eglon, king of Moab, power over Israel. That's step 2. They punished him. Getting the Ammonites and Amalekites to join him, Eglon came and attacked Israel, and they took possession of the city of palms. The Israelites were subject to Eglon, king of Moab, for 18 years. Again, the Israelites cried out to the Lord. Step 3. Cried out to the Lord, and he gave them a deliverer, Ehud. That's step 4, right? We're already there. Ehud, it says, a left-handed man, the son of Jephthah the Benjamite. Let me talk about being left-handed for a moment. Before toilet paper, there was your left hand. That's the best way I can explain it, okay? That's why you shook with your right hand, because you use this one to wipe. I know that sounds gross. You had water there washed off your hands. It's not like they weren't washing their hands. They didn't really have soap the way, that we do nowadays. But so being left-handed made you kind of weird, because you would be using that hand that most of the time you were using for something kind of gross. But there's more to it than that. Like, everybody was right-handed. So when you pulled out a sword, like, think about, if to pull out a sword from your back, you'd go like this, so your sword would be sort of that way, or pulling it from your left hip. That's going to matter later on. So, okay, Ehud, the left-handed guy, the son of Jephthah the Benjamite. We're the end of verse 15. The Israelites sent him with tribute, which means like with some money, to Eglon, king of Moab. Verse 16, Judges 3:16. Now Ehud had made a double-edged sword about 1.5 feet long, which he strapped to his right thigh under his clothing. Right thigh, because he's left-handed. Okay, that's going to matter. Verse 17, he presented the tribute to Eglon, king of Moab, who was a very fat man. After Ehud had presented the tribute, he sent on their way the men who had carried it. At the idols near Gilgal, he himself turned back and said, I have a secret message for you, O king. The king said, Quiet, and all his attendants left him. Ehud then approached him while he was sitting alone in the upper room of his summer palace, and said, I have a message from God for you. As the king rose from his seat, Ehud reached with his left hand and drew the sword from his right thigh and plunged it into the king's belly. How did he get away with that? Well, because Ehud wasn't expecting the sword to come out, because that's not what usually happened. He didn't know what the guy had in his right thigh, because he knew it wasn't a sword. Nobody reached for their sword with their left hand, except for Ehud. Verse 22. Even the handle, he stuck it in the belly, right? Even the handle sank in after the blade, which came out his back. Ehud did not pull the sword out, and the fat closed in over it. Then Ehud went out to the porch. He shut the doors of the upper room behind him and locked them. So he was so fat, the whole sword went in, and the fat just closed over it. Okay? Verse 24. After he had gone, the servants came and found the doors of the upper room locked. They said, he must be relieving himself in the inner room of the house. What are they saying? He's pooping. That's what they're saying. Like, it's a long one. It's taken him a long time. He must be, maybe he's constipated. It's taken a while. Verse 25. They waited to the point of embarrassment, but when they did not open the doors of the room, they took a key when he did not open the doors of the room, they took a key and unlocked them. There they saw their Lord fallen to the floor dead. Okay, I just think these stories are hilarious. He's so fat, the sword, covers it, and then, they die, and all his attendants are like, man, he's pooping for a long time. We should open it up, and he's dead. Just kind of funny. All right, so here's the next story, Deborah. This is important because Deborah isn't a guy. Deborah is a girl. Most Deborahs we know are girls, right? All the Deborahs I know are girls. Why does this matter? Well, it matters because women were not considered to be, the leaders of this time. I've talked about this before. Women were not given voting rights. They weren't given voting rights in America until, the 20s? I mean, it was a long time. If you know the musical Hamilton, it talks about that a little bit even. But Deborah is raised up by God to be a leader of the church. One of the questions that the Lutheran Church and all churches have really struggled with along the way is, even though women in society have not been given leadership roles throughout most of history, should they be given leadership roles in the church, for example? And there are some places in the Bible, we'll get to those much later on, that say women should be silent in the church, for instance, right? But then you have these other examples like Deborah and the book of Ruth, for instance, where a woman is held up and brought up as a leadership role. So it's kind of ambiguous, both sides, but it's important to notice that here, one of the leaders of the Israelites was a woman. That kind of matters. It was weird at the time, and it matters to us because in the church that I'm leading, the LCMC, women are ordained as pastors. So we believe that, and one of the reasons we support it is because of Deborah. So verse 1, Deborah chapter 4, verse 1. After Ehud died, the Israelites once again did evil in the eyes of the Lord. So the Lord sold them into the hands of Jabin, a king of Canaan, who reigned in Hazor. The commander of his army was Sisera, who lived in Harosheth Hagoyim, because he had 900 iron chariots and had cruelly oppressed the Israelites for 20 years. They cried to the Lord for help. Deborah, a prophetess, the wife of Lapidoth, was leading Israel at that time. Okay, there's number 4. She held court under the palm of Deborah between Ramah and Bethel in the hill country of Ephraim, and the Israelites came to her to have their disputes decided. She sent for Barak, son of Abinoam, from Kadesh in Naphtali, and said to him, "The Lord, the God of Israel, commands you, go take with you 10,000 men of Naphtali and Zebulun, and lead the way to Mount Tabor. I will lure Sisera, the commander of Jabin's army, with his chariots and his troops to the Kishon River, and give him into your hands." Barak said to her, "If you go with me, I will go, but if you don't go with me, I won't go." "Very well," Deborah said, "I will go with you, but because of the way you are going about this, the honor will not be yours, for the Lord will hand Sisera over to a woman." Now, maybe to us it's like, so who cares? She is a woman. She's telling this. It just proves the point that women were not considered as big of a deal as men were, right? Even though she was the leader, she understood this. So Deborah went with Barak to Kadesh, where he summoned Zebulun and Naphtali. 10,000 men followed him, and Deborah also went with them. Verse 11. Now Heber the Kenite had left the other Kenites, the descendants of Hobab, Moses' brother-in-law, and pitched his tent by the great tree in Zaananim near Kadesh. When they told Sisera that Barak, son of Abinoam, had gone up to Mount Tabor, Sisera gathered together his 900 iron chariots and all the men with him from Harosheth Hagoyim to the Kishon River. Then Deborah said to Barak, "Go, this is the day the Lord has given Sisera into your hands. Has not the Lord gone ahead of you?" So Barak went down Mount Tabor, followed by 10,000 men. At Barak's advance, the Lord routed Sisera and all his chariots and army by the sword, and Sisera abandoned his chariot and fled on foot. But Barak pursued the chariots and army as far as Harosheth Hagoyim, and the troops of Sisera fell by the sword. Not a man was left. Sisera, however, fled on foot to the tent of Jael, the wife of Heber the Kenite, because there were friendly relations between Jabin, king of Hazor, and the clan of Heber the Kenite. Jael went out to meet Sisera and said to him, "Come, my lord, come right in. Don't be afraid." So he entered her tent, and she put a covering over him. "I'm thirsty," he said. "Please give me some water." She opened a skin of milk, gave him a drink, and covered him up. "Stand in the doorway of the tent," he told her. "If someone comes by and asks you, 'Is anyone here?' say, 'No.'" But Jael, Heber's wife, picked up a tent peg and a hammer and went quietly to him while he lay fast asleep, exhausted. She drove the peg through his temple into the ground, and he died. Barak came in pursuit of Sisera, and Jael went out to meet him. "Come," she said, "I will show you the man you're looking for." So he went in with her, and there lay Sisera with the tent peg through his temple, dead. Why does that matter? Because a woman killed the leader, Sisera. It's just an interesting story. I just love these stories. We're going to go to Gideon chapter 6. Gideon is sort of a famous guy here. Well, another famous guy. Again, the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord, and for 7 years he gave them into the hands of the Midianites, because the power of Midian was so oppressive. The Israelites prepared shelters for themselves in mountain clefts, caves, and strongholds. Whenever the Israelites planted their crops, the Midianites, Amalekites, and other eastern peoples invaded the country. They camped on the land and ruined the crops all the way to Gaza, and did not spare a living thing for Israel, neither sheep nor cattle nor donkeys. They came up with their livestock and their tents like swarms of locusts. It was impossible to count the men and their camels. They invaded the land to ravage it. Midian so impoverished the Israelites that they cried out to the Lord for help. When the Israelites cried to the Lord because of Midian, he sent them a prophet who said, "This is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. I brought you up out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. I snatched you from the power of Egypt and from the hand of all your oppressors. I drove them from the land before you and gave you their land. And I said to you, I am the Lord your God. Do not worship the gods of the Amorites in whose land you live, but you have not listened to me." The angel of the Lord came and sat down under the oak in Ophrah, that belonged to Joash the Abizrite, where his son Gideon was threshing wheat in a winepress to keep it from the Midianites. When the angel of the Lord appeared to Gideon, he said, "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior." I'm going to stop here for a second. I got to explain a little bit of what's going on because you probably don't know, because I didn't know until I learned about this. Okay, at the beginning, it was saying that whenever the Israelites planted their crops, they would come and ruin the crops because that's how they ate, right? You couldn't go to the grocery store. You had to plant your crops and you ate off of them. So now whenever they would see that that they were planting crops, they would destroy it. But what happens when they were going to harvest it? You know, if you ever look out in the fields, a harvester, how do you know it's there? I mean, it's this huge machine, right? But there's like a lot of times when it's drier, there's all this dust coming off of it, right? They're separating the sort of heads of grain from the grain, the corn stalk from the corn kernels, the corn stalk, all that dust is called chaff. Okay, it's just extra stuff. You have to break it apart to get to the kernel of corn or the soybean, whatever. Well, back then they didn't have harvesters. They had these big like tools that they would like hit the grain to break up the corn kernels from the stalks, for instance, or the wheat from the stalk. But it would still make all this dust. So if the Midianites, the enemies, saw a bunch of dust, they would know, hey, someone's harvesting their wheat. Let's go take it away from them or kill them or whatever. Okay? Understand that? So it says that Gideon, he's going to be the judge, the fourth step that's raised up. It says he's threshing wheat. He's harvesting the wheat in a wine press. You might think that doesn't matter. Well, it does, because a wine press would have been like underground. It would have been like the ground level would have been under that. They would have like stepped on the grapes to get the wine from it. So he's, instead of harvesting or threshing the grain outside where all the dust would go up, he's underground, kind of, right? But below ground level, doing it down there, which is going to cause a lot of dust. It's probably hard to breathe. Okay, because he's hiding. He's afraid of the Midianites. So what does the angel of the Lord say to him? When the angel, in verse 12, when the angel of the Lord appeared to Gideon, he said, "The Lord is with you, mighty warrior." He's just making fun of him. He's joking, he's teasing him, he's being sarcastic, like Gideon is not a mighty warrior at all. Okay? Verse 13, "But sir," Gideon replied, "if the Lord is with us, why has all this happened to us? Where are all his wonders that our fathers told us about when they said, 'Did not the Lord bring us out of Egypt?' But now the Lord has abandoned us and put us into the hand of Midian." The Lord turned to him and said, "Go in the strength you have and save Israel out of Midian's hand. Am I not sending you?" "But Lord," Gideon asked, "how can I save Israel? My clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least in my family." The Lord answered, "I will be with you, and you will strike down all the Midianites together." Gideon replied, "If now I have found favor in your eyes, give me a sign that it really is you talking to me. Please do not go away until I come back and bring my offering and set it before you." And the Lord said, "I'll wait until you return." Gideon went in, prepared a young goat, and from an ephah of flour he made bread from yeast, putting the meat in a basket and its broth in a pot. He brought them out and offered them to him under the oak. The angel of the Lord said to him, "Take the meat and the unleavened bread, place them on this rock, and pour out the broth." And Gideon did so. With the tip of the staff that was in his hand, the angel of the Lord touched the meat and the unleavened bread. Fire flared from the rock, consuming the meat and the bread, and the angel of the Lord disappeared. When Gideon realized that it was the angel of the Lord, he exclaimed, "Ah, sovereign Lord, I have seen the angel of the Lord face to face." But the Lord said to him, "Peace, do not be afraid, you are not going to die." So Gideon built an altar to the Lord there and called it, "The Lord is Peace." To this day it stands in Ophrah and of the Abizrites. Anyway, lots of crazy words, aren't there? So that's the story of Gideon. God's trying to give him courage, but he's still sort of a chicken. So we're going to go ahead to, verse 36. This is just a little bit of story that's good to know. So chapter 6, verse 36. Gideon said to God, "If you will save Israel by the hand as you have promised, look, I will place a wool fleece on the threshing floor," a big piece of wool. Like if you shaved a sheep, just a big piece of wool from a sheep. "If there is dew on only the fleece, and all the ground around it is dry, then I will know that you will save Israel by my hand, as you said." And that is what happened. Gideon rose early the next day. He squeezed the fleece and wrung out the dew, a bowl full of water. Then Gideon said to God, "Do not be angry with me. Let me make just one more request. Allow me one more test with the fleece. This time, make the fleece dry and the ground covered with dew." That night, God did so. Only the fleece was dry. All the ground was covered with dew. So Gideon just had a real trouble believing God and was always like, "Okay, now you do this and I'll believe you. Okay, do it backwards, then I'll believe you." And God did it every time. There's another fun story, chapter 7, starting at verse 1. I'm going to try to read through this fast. "Early in the morning, Jerubbaal, that is Gideon, I guess he had another name, and all his men camped at the spring of Herod." By the way, I'm glad I only have to say Gideon a lot and not Jerubbaal. "The camp of Midian was north of them in the valley near the hill of Moreh." Verse 2. "The Lord said to Gideon, you have too many men for me to deliver Midian into their hands. In order that Israel may not boast against me that her own strength has saved her, announce now to the people, anyone who trembles with fear may turn back and leave Mount Gilead." So 22,000 men left, while only 10,000 remained. Verse 4. "But the Lord said to Gideon, there are still too many men. Take them down to the water, and I will sift them for you there. If I say this one shall go with you, he shall go. But if I say this one shall not go with you, he shall not go." So Gideon took the men down to the water. There the Lord told him, "Separate those who lap the water with their tongues like a dog from those who kneel down to drink." 300 men lapped with their hands to their mouths. All the rest got down on their knees to drink. The Lord said to Gideon, "With the 300 men that lapped, I will save you and give the Midianites into your hands. Let all the other men go, each to his own place." So Gideon sent the rest of the Israelites to their tents, but kept 300 who took over the provisions and trumpets of the others. I'm not going to read the rest of the story because the rest of the story is that God keeps his promise and delivers the Israelites from the Midianites with just these 300. But just so you understand what's going on. So originally there were 32,000 men to fight this battle. And God's like, that's too many. Because if 32,000 men go out to war, you guys will win, and you'll think it's because you guys rock. You know, you're so amazing. You're such good fighters. You're such good warriors. There's so many of you. He's like, that's not going to give me glory. You're not going to really believe that I'm the reason that you're winning. So he's like, anyone who's a little nervous, anyone who doesn't want to go to war, you just go home. So 22,000 of them left, leaving 10,000. Then he's like, 10,000? Still too many. Everyone go get a drink. And so he's like, okay, 9,700 of the people that go to get a drink get down by the river and just get on their knees and are like, right? Because that's what I would do. If I wanted to drink some water, I'd get down to the river, lift it up with my hand, and do it that way. But 300 of them licked it like a dog. Right? They're lapping it up like a dog. And so God's like, I'm going with the 300 that lick it up like a dog. So he goes from 32,000 to 300, and he defeats, the Midianites are defeated with 300 people. Why? Because God wanted to show off. He wanted to say, you're going to win because of me, not because of you. A lot of stories in the Bible are like this. He takes someone who's weak and he makes them the mighty warrior, like Gideon. Or he takes a woman like Deborah and has her be the leader of the Israelites. Or Moses, who says that he just can't do it. He's slow of speech, slow of tongue, and he has him be the leader, right? All these examples. Jacob, remember Jacob and Esau. Jacob is the younger. He's not supposed to be the leader, but God has him be the leader. Or Jesus, he's the carpenter's son. He's not a rich king. And how does he win? By dying on the cross. There are lots of these examples. And the reason I tell you this is because you, each may not feel like you're good enough, you're strong enough, that you're, spiritual enough to be God's tool. But God wants to use you just for that reason, because you bring him glory when you do the things he asks you to do. All right, so I'm going to read you another little story here. Judges chapter 10, Jephthah, verse 6. Again, the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord. They served the Baals and the Ashtoreths and the god of Aram, the gods of Sidon, the gods of Moab, and the gods of the Ammonites, and the gods of the Philistines. And because the Israelites forsook the Lord and no longer served him, he became angry with them. He sold them into the hands of the Philistines and the Ammonites, who that year shattered and crushed them. For 18 years they oppressed all the Israelites on the east side of the Jordan in Gilead, the land of the Amorites. The Ammonites also crossed the Jordan to fight against Judah, Benjamin, and the house of Ephraim, and Israel was in great distress. Then the Israelites cried out to the Lord, "We have sinned against you, forsaking our God and serving the Baals." The Lord replied, here, I think I'm going to jump ahead. Let's see. I wrote it down over here. We're going to jump ahead to chapter 11, verse 1. Jephthah, the Gileadite, was a mighty warrior. Okay, this is number 4. His father was Gilead. His mother was a prostitute. Gilead's wife also bore him sons, and when they were grown up, they drove Jephthah away. "You are not going to get any inheritance in our family," they said, "because you are the son of another woman." So Jephthah fled from his brothers and settled in the land of Tob, where a group of adventurers gathered around him and followed him. Just to notice, Jephthah, who's going to be the judge, is the son of a prostitute. Again, God uses somebody who isn't looked on great by the rest of society. Sometime later, when the Ammonites made war on Israel, the elders of Gilead went to get Jephthah from the land of Tob. "Come," they said, "be our commander so we can fight the Ammonites." Jephthah said to them, "Didn't you hate me and drive me from my father's house? Why do you come to me now when you are in trouble?" The elders of Gilead said to him, "Nevertheless, we are turning to you now. Come with us to fight the Ammonites, and you will be our head over all who live in Gilead." Now we're going to jump to verse 30. And Jephthah made a vow to the Lord, "If you give the Ammonites into my hands, whatever comes out of the door of my house to meet me when I return in triumph from the Ammonites will be the Lord's, and I will sacrifice it as a burnt offering." Then Jephthah went over to fight the Ammonites, and the Lord gave them into his hands. He devastated 20 towns from Aroer to the vicinity of Minnith as far as Abel Keramim. Thus Israel subdued Ammon. When Jephthah returned to his home in Mizpah, who should come out to meet him but his daughter, dancing to the sound of tambourines? She was an only child. Except for her, he had neither son nor daughter. When he saw her, he tore his clothes and cried, "Oh, my daughter, you have made me miserable and wretched because I have made a vow to the Lord that I cannot break." "My father," she replied, "you have given your word to the Lord. Do to me just as you have promised, now that the Lord has avenged you of your enemies, the Ammonites. But grant me this one request," she said. "Give me 2 months to roam the hills and weep with my friends, because I will never marry." "You may go," he said, and he let her go for 2 months. She and the girls went into the hills and wept because she would never marry. After the 2 months, she returned to her father, and he did to her as he had vowed, and she was a virgin. From this comes the Israelite custom that each year the young women of Israel go out for 4 days to commemorate the daughter of Jephthah the Gileadite. It's just a weird story, but it's a good story to know if you're a Christian. There's like operas that are written about this, stories about this. I don't know. God said he would give Jephthah the victory. I don't know why Jephthah said, and just to make sure, I just think if God says he's going to do something for you, maybe don't add things. And if you do this for me, I'm going to give you $1,000 to the church. It's like he was going to do it for you even without the $1,000. And now you're just out $1,000. Not that I'm saying you shouldn't give to the church. That's great. But, Jephthah, I feel like he kind of brought this on himself in a way. The final story, and I'm going to read just a little bit of it. We don't have time to read all of it. Actually, you've probably heard of it. That's the thing. Samson and Delilah, chapter 13. Chapter 13, the birth of Samson, verse 1. It'll give us our last chance to remember, what this cycle is. What's number 1? Verse 1, again the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord, so the Lord delivered them into the hands of the Philistines for 40 years. Notice how they get worse and worse. 18 years, 8 years, 18 years, 40 years. A certain man of Zorah named Manoah from the clan of the Danites had a wife who was sterile and remained childless. The angel of the Lord appeared to her and said, "You are sterile and childless, but you are going to conceive and have a son. Now see to it that you drink no wine or other fermented drink, and that you do not eat anything unclean, because you will conceive and give birth to a son. No razor may be used on his head, because the boy is to be a Nazarite, set apart from God from birth, and he will begin the deliverance of Israel from the hands of the Philistines." So somewhere in there, I guess, they cried out to the Lord, and he delivers them with this guy named Samson. But we're going to jump ahead. Actually, I'm just going to remind you of the story. Do you remember Samson? He has long hair. He meets this lady named Delilah, who's his girlfriend. And Delilah is like paid off by the Philistines to find out how Samson is so strong. Okay, and eventually she cuts his hair because he admits to her. And then they like gouge out his eyes, and they're making him like a slave to the Philistines. And finally he's like, "God, please give me strength one last time and I'll defeat all the Philistines." And he like he pushes over these pillars, and the whole place comes tumbling down and kills all the Philistines. But that's the story. Again, maybe Samson, the problem with Samson wasn't that he was weak, but that he was like weak with women. Like he sort of gave in. He had a weakness. Let's put it that way. And even though when he was blind, that's when he defeated everyone. So that's the book of Judges. I think it's a pretty cool book, and I think it reminds us that this is the same kind of cycle that we all go through as Christians too, right? We mess up. We experience some consequences from that. God punishes us in some way. Not always, but sometimes. And then we're like, finally, we turn back to God and say, I really screwed up. I really messed up. Please forgive me. And God, well, now he doesn't send us a new judge, but he sent us Jesus Christ to forgive our sins. So maybe he sends a friend or a pastor or whatever to remind us your sins are forgiven because of Jesus Christ. So thanks for listening. I hope that you have a great week. And please remember that Jesus loves you, and he is with you no matter how strong or weak you may feel. He can use you to do great things. Talk to you later.